One of the great new features of ASP.NET MVC 5 is the addition of the Bootstrap CSS framework to the default project. Now, Bootstrap can be used with a lot of different web application technologies, not just MVC or ASP.NET, as it's primarily a client-side library. But it is a great way to do layout, to have a bunch of nicely designed and configured UI components. There's a jQuery component to it that provides some JavaScript capabilities for those components. It really simplifies the building of a web application. In ASP.NET version 5.0, Bootstrap is now the default HTML, CSS, JavaScript framework bundled with ASP.NET MVC. The JavaScript portion of the framework relies upon jQuery. So basically, Bootstrap provides some jQuery plugin support that allows some of its components to have some dynamic client-side functionality. In version 5.1 of MVC, things get a little bit nicer. There is support in the editor for HTML helper to pass in some additional HTML attributes, which are helpful to setting up and configuring your Bootstrap framework on the client side. So, what is Bootstrap? Bootstrap is a CSS framework. Anyone who's done any type of web development is familiar with CSS in that you use CSS to lay out your pages, to style your text, to do any number of things that have to do with the UI, the visual part of your website. It simplifies and reduces the time needed to create compelling and effective user interfaces. And Bootstrap is installed into your project via NuGet, and it's included by default in their ASP.NET MVC 5 website. The cool thing about it being installed via NuGet is that when updates come out to Bootstrap, you can automatically upgrade your version of Bootstrap to the next latest version through the NuGet process. One additional thing is Bootstrap supports themes, so you can build whole themes around the Bootstrap framework if you're going for a particular custom look or feel for your application. So what comes with Bootstrap? First of all, the Bootstrap itself is written in the CSS preprocessor language called Less. All of the CSS that is generated as part of the Bootstrap framework is actually written in Less and then compiled out to CSS. The Bootstrap CSS framework comes with the following. First of all, it comes with a bunch of CSS files. Next, it comes with some font files. These are used for some icons that can be displayed on various Bootstrap components. Next, it comes with the JavaScript files necessary for some of the dynamic functionality that you can make use of in the Bootstrap framework. And finally, as we mentioned earlier, the JavaScript components do require jQuery. So let's talk about Bootstrap, jQuery, and IE8. The current version of Bootstrap is version 3, and it's geared towards IE9 and later. Bootstrap version 2 supports IE8. If your application is going to have a lot of IE8 users or absolutely has to flawlessly support IE8, then you're going to want to take a look at using version 2.0 of Bootstrap. That being said, some of the version 3 features do work fine in IE8. It has been my experience that if I only have a small percentage of users that are going to be using IE8, that I use version 3.0 or greater, and then I go back and test my web application in IE8 to make sure that it's acceptable and that everything for the most part works right. I'm not a huge fan of developing things with older libraries when there are newer libraries out there. So unless you absolutely have to support IE8 perfectly, you should definitely make use of the version 3 that gets installed as the default with your ASP.NET MVC 5.0 project. The next thing is jQuery. jQuery is a similar situation. So there's version 1 and then there's version 2. Version 2 is geared towards IE9 and later, and version 1 fully supports IE8. Once again, if you're going to have to support IE8, then you're going to need to make sure that you're using version 1.0 of jQuery. I have found that jQuery is not quite as forgiving as Bootstrap is in terms of trying to use a later version with IE8. Now, fortunately, Bootstrap version 3.0 works great with the version 1 of jQuery, and so you don't have to have version 2. But if you know for a fact that you're only going to be coding towards IE9 and later, it's definitely better to make use of jQuery 2.0 from the get-go. So what does Bootstrap offer? First, it greatly simplifies the layout of your web pages. One of the most challenging things as a software developer, in my experience, has been CSS. CSS is a great tool, but it can be tricky. And when you're trying to do all your own layout, trying to specify floats and set up your div tags and everything else, it can be very complex. In fact, a lot of times people will just revert to using tables because logically it just makes better sense in their head for doing layout. But as we all know, using tables for layout is a big no-no. Tables are used for tabular data only. And to actually lay out your web page, you use CSS. And so Bootstrap uses a 12-column layout approach to lay out your web page, and it makes things so much easier. So we'll be doing a demonstration to show you how that works. Next, it provides a number of useful user interface components, everything from alert boxes to panels to nav bars. There's a lot of different user interface components that Bootstrap offers right out of the box that can greatly speed up your web application development, and it will look professional and be easy to use by your end user, and it just makes life a whole lot easier. Finally, it incorporates JavaScript for some of those components so that you have a more dynamic web experience, things like modal pop-ups or tab strips. Using JavaScript combined with the CSS styling creates some really useful components that are available, right out of the box to speed up your web development process. For our first Bootstrap demo, we're going to take a look at the layout capabilities of Bootstrap. We are first going to create a new ASP.NET project, and we're going to take a look at the default content. The default content out of the box actually makes use of the Bootstrap layout. And so we'll take a quick look at that, and then we are actually going to write our own code that demonstrates some of the basic layout and responsive capabilities. For this Bootstrap demo, we are going to create a standard MVC5 project. We will take a look at the content that is created by the project, specifically the Bootstrap content. Then we'll jump over to the Bootstrap website and we'll take a look at the layout features of Bootstrap. And then we'll come back and make some modifications to the page and take a look and see how Bootstrap actually works. So we're going to do File, New, Project. We are going to select Web, ASP.NET, Web Application. We'll leave our web application name the same, and we are going to click OK. Now we're going to come in here, we're going to click on MVC. It's going to have a checkbox there for the MVC core references. We're going to change our authentication to no authentication. We're not going to add unit tests for this, and we're not going to host it in the cloud. And now we'll click OK. And now Visual Studio is going to create our standard MVC5 website. So now we're going to scroll down and we're going to take a look at the layout page for the application. Okay. Now, we're going to start to see some Bootstrap stuff here right off the get-go. Notice the navbar and container and navbar header. These are Bootstrap classes that deal with the navigation bar created at the top of the default MVC5 application. If we come to Internet Explorer and run this, we're going to see that we have this black bar across the top with application name, home, about, and contact. If we go back to Visual Studio, we're going to see those same links here using this navbar functionality provided by Bootstrap. The next thing that we're going to see is we're going to see this container tag provided by Bootstrap. The container tag is where we put all of our content for our web page, and you'll notice that our render body from our Razor syntax appears within this tag. So now we're going to go and open up our specific view that we're looking at. We're on the home page, so we're going to look at index.cshtml. We're going to see some more Bootstrap in here. Here we have the Jumbotron class from Bootstrap. This has the ASP.NET as a free web framework, and if we go back to our web page, we'll see our big Jumbotron right here. That's our Jumbotron control. That's all provided by Bootstrap. The single best feature, in my opinion, about Bootstrap is the ability to lay out pages. Bootstrap uses a grid type of layout. Basically, it's a combination of rows and columns. Bootstrap uses something called a 12-column layout. Basically, picture your web page being divided into 12 columns. If we take a look here at this index.cshtml page, you'll see a class here called row. And then within it, you'll see several classes, several div tags with a class of call MD4, and then there will be one more with call MD4. If you add up those three 4s, what do they add up to? They add up to 12. Whatever size these columns are, they have to add up to 12. So for example, I could change this to a 3, and I could change this one to a 3, but then this one would have to be increased to 6. So with Bootstrap, it handles laying everything out in the row for you, and it handles the columns for you. The key is remembering that it's a 12-column layout. So as we can see, Bootstrap is used throughout our default application, our default MVC5 application. So before we dive deeper into Bootstrap, let's go to the primary source of information about Bootstrap, which is the Bootstrap website. So I'm going to go to my web browser, and I'm going to create a new tab, and I'm going to go to the website getbootstrap.com. And that's going to take me to the website for Bootstrap, and it's going to have all the information that I need in order to use Bootstrap in my web application. I'm going to click on the Getting Started section first. In here, this will kind of go through and talk about the basics of how Bootstrap is built, where you can get it from, migrating different versions, just a bunch of preparatory information to make use of Bootstrap. I highly encourage you to read through this page. The next page we're going to take a quick look at is the CSS page. Now here, this starts to cover the fundamentals of using Bootstrap in your application. For example, to use Bootstrap, you need to be using the HTML5 doc type. And so it goes through and explains how to use the doc type and how to specify the one for HTML5. Another interesting thing about Bootstrap is a mobile-first CSS framework. There's two types of ways that web applications can handle mobile and desktop and tablet type devices. One is called adaptive and one is called responsive. In an adaptive framework, the server decides which content to send to the client, whether the client is a phone or a tablet or a desktop device. Bootstrap uses a responsive approach to CSS layout. Instead of the server deciding what to send, Bootstrap uses media selectors to display your content in the most appropriate way for the device that you're on. As you can see here, there's lots and lots of Bootstrap documentation. The next class we want to talk about quickly is the container class. The container class is kind of this element that wraps all of your site contents, and the actual 12-column grid system goes inside of this class. There's two types. There's a container that's used for a responsive fixed width container, and then there's also the container fluid class for a full width container. Essentially, what this does is on some websites you have a fixed width that never goes any wider than a certain size, and if you happen to be on something smaller, then you need it to be responsive to work within a smaller container, but it never goes past a max width. On other websites, you want to take up the entire viewport. And so if you want to take up the entire viewport, you would use the container fluid class. Now scrolling down here, we have the grid system. And this is what I want to take a quick look at here on the Bootstrap site. As we mentioned earlier, Bootstrap uses a 12-column layout. And as you can see here, based upon how you want to group those 12 columns are up to you. On the top line there, we actually have 12 actual columns, each with a width of 1. However, if you look at the next 3 rows, you'll see where we have here one with a column width of 8, so we actually take up 8 of the display columns. And then we have the second one being a column width of 4, taking up 4 of those display columns. So in the one below it, we actually have 3 columns of the same equal size. This is what we saw in our index.cshtml file for the MVC project that we created. And then finally down here we see where we have 2 columns, each with a width of 6. The thing that we have in common with all 4 of these is they all add up to 12, and that's very, very, very important since Bootstrap uses a 12-column width approach for layout. And as you go through the rest of this page, you're going to find all types of documentation and examples and how to make this work with mobile devices and tablets and desktops. Truly, when doing Bootstrap development on your website, the Bootstrap website is your best resource and something that you will definitely keep open on your desktop as you're writing code. Now we're going to go back to Visual Studio, and we will try out these Bootstrap layout classes. So what we want to do is we actually want to delete the content in the index.cshtml page. We will delete that. And then we're going to set our layout equal to null. Now that we've done that, we need to be sure that we include Bootstrap, CSS, and JavaScript file along with the jQuery JavaScript file on our page. So we'll actually just go ahead and make this a full HTML page. And we will specify a doc type. We'll have our head tag. And we'll specify a title, sample, Bootstrap web page. We'll put a link tag in as a reference to our Bootstrap style sheet. Now, in MVC 5, just like as in earlier versions of MVC, our Bootstrap CSS file is going to be located underneath the content folder. So we'll put in content/Bootstrap type text style sheet. Next we'll add our body tag. And then at the bottom, script. Our Bootstrap script tags along with script files along with jQuery are all located under the scripts folder. So now we have our reference to jQuery. And our Bootstrap file. Next, we'll go ahead and add our first container class using Bootstrap. So div class container. And what we'll do is we're actually going to create 2 columns, each with a width of 6. Class call MD 6. And we'll just copy and paste that. Make this be column 1, column 2. So we'll save all of that. We will run this in Internet Explorer. And you'll see here we now have column 1 and column 2. We'll come in here and we'll actually add a 3rd column. Now notice this is greater than 12. So we're going to drop that to 3. make that 6, make this one 3, and we'll call this left, center, and right. And we'll run Internet Explorer again. And now we can see there's our left column, our center column, and our right column. Now, just for fun, set a background color. We'll make that one blue. Red and green. And we'll set our text color to be white. We'll save that, and we'll run it. And now you can see better here, left, center, and right. Now what would happen if I actually did make this be more than 12? So what if I had made this 4? So now we have 3 plus 6, which is 9, and 9 plus 4 is 13, and 13 is greater than 12. So what happens? We run Internet Explorer. We'll see that Bootstrap moves this down to the next row so that it occupies the same width, but it's not on the same row as the other content. So let's now change that back to 3. Now you might be wondering, what does the MD stand for? I understand call and I understand the number, but what does the MD stand for? The MD has to do with the size of the viewport. There are actually 4 different values that you can put there. They are XS, which means extra small, there is SM, which is small, there is MD, which is medium, and there is LG, which is large. Extra small is typically used for phones, small is used for tablets, medium is used for desktops, and large is used for large desktop screens. So what happens if I do this? I can actually come in here and say call XS 4 Now you'll notice call XS4, these 3 values equal 12. These 3 values equal 12. So if I run Internet Explorer, you'll see that I have my 3, my 6, and my 3. But if I make this smaller, notice how we have 4, 4, and 4. But if I make this wider, all of a sudden it will jump back to 3, 6, and 3. This is an example of how Bootstrap does a responsive layout. When my viewport is larger, it uses the medium classes. When it's smaller, it's using the extra small classes. So how do these rules apply? Basically, Bootstrap will use the CSS class which most closely matches what the viewport size is. So, for example, if I have a large viewport size and I have a large class defined, then it will use that. If I have a medium viewport size and I have a medium viewport class, it will use that. But if I have a medium display size and a large viewport class, then it will not use the large. If there's an extra small viewport class defined and I'm on a medium display, then it will use the extra small. It uses the largest size class that's been specified, but does not exceed its viewport size. In addition to having the ability to specify columns like this, Bootstrap also allows you to skip columns. So for example, let's say I didn't want this center column here, and I wanted to get rid of it. I could get rid of it, but I still want that gap of the 6 columns. I can come in here and I can specify call MD offset 6. Now when I view this web page, if I reload this, you'll notice the center column is gone, but the right column is still there. So I have my left and I have my right, and my center is gone. By using this offset class, it actually moves the right column over to the edge, skipping over those other 6 columns.